Well, what's the ending going to be like? Well, God wrote about each step as He draws back the universe from its fallenness. God chronicles the cosmic earthquake and the pitiful death of the earth in the tribulation time. What does the rapture allow us to escape? And I believe personally that God is not going to make believers go through. Born again, church member believers. Members not of Tulsa Bible Church, but of the Church of Jesus Christ, His body. We will not have to go through the time when He lets Satan be confined to this planet and pour out his hatred against the saints and against Israel. I don't believe we go through. I believe there will be Christians on the earth. And I believe that there will be a lot of people saved. But I believe that believers that are believers at the point of the tribulation start, Christ will take them out, and that's called the harpazo, or the snatching. But what will they escape? What will we escape if we're alive and remain unto the coming of Christ? Well, if you will start in Revelation chapter 6, just for a second, I'm going to give you a 2-minute overview of the tribulation. How do you like this? This is called a jet tour of the tribulation, okay? And you can look out the windows with me, but look quick because we're going fast. But Revelation in 6, and then we'll look at 8 and 9 and 16, those 4 chapters. I want to briefly describe the living hell that those who come to Christ will escape by being a part of the rapture. Now, these are only a few things that are going to happen. Number 1, chapter 6, verse 8. 1/4 of all humans will die. Some through war, some because of famine. In verse 8, you'll see a description of it. Others by the wild beasts of the earth. God is going to unleash, and there's going to be not just natural disasters of volcanoes and all that stuff, but wild animals are going to start killing people, and they're going to proliferate. It's going to be very horrible. And whether by death that is swift or instant or death that is lingering and excruciating, 25% of all the people will die, as it says right there in verse 8. Death and Hades, in the middle of the verse, followed him, and authority was given to him over 1/4 of the earth to kill with the sword, that's warfare, with famine, and with pestilence, that's Ebola and AIDS and all other types of black death, the bubonic plague, and wild beasts of the earth. Now, the world's population, when they last counted in 1995, was 5,733,687,096. Of course, it was only that way for a millisecond because people are born and die. But 1/4 of this would be 1,433,421,774 people. That's 5.5 times the population of the United States. Now, can you imagine that? Can you imagine in a brief period of time 5 times our population dying from warfare, from famine, from all these gruesome pestilences, and from wild beasts? That's what's going to happen. And remember, the population of the world is doubling every 39.5 years. So every day, the number of people who will die becomes larger and larger. Look at verse 7 of chapter 8. 1/3 of all the vegetation will be burned up on the planet. All grass, every tree, everything green is going to be affected. Can you imagine what this planet will be like that is so verdant, that is so full of life? I mean, last week they just found 25 new species living in the cocoa trees down on the edge of the Amazon. They were cutting them down and they found 25 new species of fauna and flora in one tree. I mean, our God is an amazing creator. The diversity, the complexity. I mean, one animal they already knew existed, they didn't know it was still alive, is the acrobatic bird. And they said it has fat pink legs and a totally black feathered body, and it spends its life running on treetops. And it runs on leaves, and when it falls, it'll flap its wings, get back up, and it runs just on nothing. It just runs on leaves. And it eats little bugs that live up there. And that little bird, only God would give it pink legs. I mean, what a God we have. They gave pink-legged acrobat birds. But 1/3 of all vegetation will be burned up. Look at verse 12. The sun and the moon will be darkened as nature goes on a revolt. Can you imagine the sure light of the sun? All of a sudden, the sun is going to start dimming and dimming and dimming, and it's going to wane. You say that's impossible. No. Did you know our sun has a cycle it goes through? Did you know that there was a time when when the canals of Venice were frozen solid, we're talking about in modern times, the sun goes through a cycle where it diminishes its solar output, and then it comes back on and then exceeds its normal output, and we're going to see both of those things happen during the tribulation, or we won't, unless we're not saved. I hope none of you experience these things, but we will see them from the presence of God happen on this earth as the sun goes through an expansion, and it'll get hot, and it'll go through a contraction, and will start dimming, as it talks about in verse 12. The gates of hell will open. Look at chapter 9 and verses 3 through 6. And what it says there is that hordes of these locusts, the size of horses, will come on the earth, and these locusts will be allowed to sting men like scorpions, and the pain from one sting will last 5 months. And the Bible says that men and women will beg God to let them die because the pain is so horrible, and God won't let them die. This is a demonic, horrific attack. And then, if you continue, in chapter 18, verse 8, it says this, that there will be a worldwide famine like the world has never seen. By the way, normally, all the time, people are starving to death. I mean, when I've been to India with different groups, we have seen people just laid out, probably near death. They just lay in the gutters, and they're starving and dying. In Africa, in third world countries, many places. But there will be a famine. It says in 18:8, for this reason in one day her plague will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she'll be burned up with fire, the Lord our God who judges is strong. There is going to be a famine of pandemic proportion. Not epidemic, that means, it's big, but pandemic means it's going to be everywhere. There's going to be this global worldwide famine. And then there will be this world war that is so bloody that the blood of those killed in the battle will flow for 200 miles. And it will be so much for 200 miles that when a horse walks, it will splash upward to the height of the horse's bridle for 200 miles of blood. And during the Great Tribulation, when it's all reckoned, it says in Revelation 14 and verse 20 that 1 out of every 3 people will die. 1 out of 3. That means you can just go down your row, and if we were representative of the whole planet, every third person will either get eaten by a wild animal, will either get stung by one of these demon hordes, will starve to death, will be taken up in the overheating of the sun, or will get some gruesome Ebola pestilence and will bleed to death. But 1 out of every 3 will die.